Hi, everyone. This is Joni McGarry. Thank you so much for tuning in. I recently spoke to Leslie Manookian. She is the president and founder of Health Freedom Defense Fund and producer of the 2011 award winning documentary, The Greater Good. Leslie shares what prompted her to leave her highly successful Wall Street career to become a powerful advocate for informed choice and medical liberty. She fills me in on the recently passed landmark Idaho Medical Freedom Act and why it should be replicated in every state in the nation. Her story reminds us that one person can make a huge difference. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hi, Leslie Manookian. Welcome to the show. I'm really glad to have you here.
It's great to be with you, Joni.
Well,
I'm sorry
thanks.
it took so long.
Oh, that's okay. Well, you're a very busy person. I appreciate you taking the time. I was really keen to talk to you today because you are really at the forefront of fighting for medical autonomy, for our freedoms in the medical arena. And I thought we could just maybe start out by you telling us what called you to that. How did you get into this kind of work? And then we'll take it from there to a number of different topics that we've discussed.
Yeah. So back in the 1990s and late 1990s, I went to business school. I graduated in 1992 and I went to go and work for Goldman Sachs. And then Goldman in New York, and then they transferred me to London and I worked there for a couple of years. And then I just was sort of disillusioned with it and I left. I felt that there were inherent conflicts of interest in the business that I was just uncomfortable with. And so I quit. And after a few months, I went to go and work for one of my biggest clients, a company called Alliance Capital. And I give this as background because, I was into being healthy, but I was extremely mainstream. I never doubted that there was anything wrong with most medicines or a shot or anything like that.
Same.
I was fully on the whole cholesterol bandwagon, which is, I don't know if your listeners know this, but is very much a lie. Basically, saturated fat does not cause high cholesterol, and cholesterol is not some villain that needs to be taken down or suppressed in the body. And even though it's been, alleged in this way, but so basically, I was this mainstream person. I was even getting flu vaccines. I got a ton of vaccines before I went to Southeast Asia, before I started my big job at Goldman in New York. I was a mainstream person. I believe that vaccines were the greatest invention of mankind. And I'm working on Wall Street and I'm working for Alliance Capital. In my capacity, I was the director of European growth portfolio management and research. And in that capacity, I was responsible for selecting the stocks that we would put into our European and our international and growth portfolios, global portfolios rather. And I had the CEO, the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and the head of R&D, Research and Development, and Investor Relations of one of the pharmaceutical companies that we invested in come in to see us. And they came to see us because we were some of the biggest shareholders in the world at that point, and we had a large position, $1 billion or something. We invested in this pharmaceutical company because they had a blockbuster drug that was coming out. This blockbuster drug was in phase 3 trials, which is the last phase of clinical trials before a pharmaceutical company can apply to the FDA for licensure for that product. So everybody, most of the investors were banking on this big drug that was coming out, being a blockbuster and making billions of dollars for the company. And the stock was getting hit in the stock market. It was down 25 or 30%.
Was that because of bad phase 3 trial results coming out?
Well, rumors were trickling out. Okay. Nobody knew exactly what was going on, but there were rumors that people were suffering on the clinical trials. Nobody knew the scoop. And so the executive team of the pharmaceutical company, and this is a name brand company that everybody watching this guarantee knows, comes into our offices, and the CEO looks at me and he says, listen, it's very rare, but in a few instances, some people have died. And he then said, the bad news is the FDA is going to make us put this little black box warning on our packaging. The good news is we still think we could do $7 billion in peak sales.
Let me just back up for somebody who might not know. What is a black box warning?
So that's why I kind of if they're listening.
Yeah.
There's this little, there's a package that contains a drug or a
Mhm.
biologic like a vaccine that the product comes in, and on the package there will be this little black box.
Mhm.
It will have white lettering in it that says, "Warning, this drug is known to cause blah 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 blah," whatever the different conditions are. Okay,
Okay,
and
so
it's
he's
like a heightened level of warning to the physician who's going to administer it that they should be telling the patient too.
okay. So
So
this guy comes
usually
in and he's saying that this is gonna happen. We don't want the black box. People have died, but that's okay because we're gonna make billions of dollars.
he's saying the bad news is, so this is gonna slow us down a little bit. We're not gonna peak out at 10 billion in sales a year. We're gonna peak out at 7 billion in sales a year. So because of the black box warning.
And you're sitting in this room, and that is really stunning. And I know that that probably affected you a great deal. Did it affect the other people around the table?
Well, for me, I was just like, I felt like I'd been kicked in the gut. I was just sitting there thinking, "Oh my gosh, they're gonna kill people, and he thinks that I'm happy because the stock is gonna go back up. We're gonna make a lot of money." And I'm just like, "Oh my gosh, this is just horrific." So I sit through the rest of the meeting, and I'm just yeah, no one else seemed to flinch. I mean, I don't wanna say anything negative about any of my colleagues because they were
Sure.
lovely people, but I just think that a lot of people don't, um I don't know, I don't think it hits them the same way. We're all different, right? And I
Mhm,
just think it's
mhm.
maybe partly my childhood and partly my life experiences and partly grace, Like, I
Yeah.
mean, it's just what it is. But I'll tell you, after the meeting, um, people were like, "Okay, we should be buying the stock." And I literally went to my office and paced back and forth and then walked down the hallway to our pharmaceutical analyst's office, and I flung her door open, and I was like, "This is wrong." And she just looked up at me from her chair like, "Yeah, what do you want me to do about it, lady?" And the truth is,
Yeah.
like, what could she do about it? But, I
Right.
mean, it was we both knew that it was wrong, and I was really exercised, and it was kind of a pivotal point for me. It was really a
Mhm.
truly a turning point in my life in that I just felt like I am playing for the wrong team.
And you were young and in an incredible position of, your great success, poised for more success.
Yeah.
So it's really quite remarkable that you were able to have the courage and the
Yeah.
virtue to
I
make
was
that
really
turn.
I was really kind of at the beginning of really taking off. That I
Yeah.
think year before that or that year, I got the biggest bonus I would ever get, and I felt empty. I cried. My husband was like, "Why are you crying?" And I was like, "Because I feel empty." It's like
Yeah.
I had money, position, power, everything, and I learned at age 36, basically, that
And
those things don't buy happiness.
right. And so you hear this about this, huge pharmaceutical company. And is that what made you think, "Huh, what else is behind this curtain that maybe I'm not questioning?"
Well, it kind of did, but it wasn't the full thing at that point. What happened was I was also sick because I had been getting all these shots and I didn't know that there was a downside, and I had had vaccine reactions myself. And I kept going to the doctor. I went to the doctor in London over and over and over again because I had, like, I don't know, 12 or 15 sinus infections in 3 years.
Wow, and
And
you're a
I'd
young,
never had a
healthy
sinus
person.
and I'd never had a sinus infection. And I also had developed multiple chemical sensitivities, a sleep disorder, digestive issues, food allergies, chronic migraines. I couldn't take a sip of wine without getting a migraine, a
Mhm.
sip. And I would be laid out for not just a couple of hours, 5 to 7 days. I would literally force myself to go to work. I'd have to lie under my desk. I mean, it was just brutal. And my digestive tract just it was in utter disarray.
Mhm.
I developed numbness and tingling on my legs, like all sorts of crazy things. Like just it really I didn't know what was going on, but I went to the doctor and he said, "Listen, I know you're sick and you know you're sick, but I can't help you. Mainstream medicine can't help you. I think you should go and see a homeopath or an acupuncturist."
Hmm.
Now in London, there used to be, I don't know if there still is, but there used to be the homeopathic hospital. And everywhere you went, like into every kind of mainstream drugstore, like the equivalent of a Duane Reade or a
Mhm. Yeah,
Walgreens or
CVS.
something or
Yeah.
CVS, you would see, homeopathic medicines. You would see homeopathic creams, you would see all the pills and little they were just like it was very, very common. It
Mhm.
was actually covered by the National Health Service.
Wow.
And same thing in France up until about less than 10 years ago. And it's because there's a war against homeopathy, not because it doesn't work, not because it's quackery as people claim, but because it's the biggest threat that exists to the mainstream medical
Mhm.
paradigm and pharmaceutical model. That's why. And they've been attacking it for 200 years because it's a threat to them. That's why.
Mhm.
That's it. So anyway, um, I went and saw a homeopath and I felt like, oh my gosh, this is the first person who understands what's going on with me. And it was so impactful that I enrolled in homeopathy college for the
Wow.
weekend, on the weekends. And I started it about a year from those first tests, that I did with my doctor who said, I
Mhm.
can't help you. And the very first day in homeopathy school, we're doing orientation, like an hour and a half session with this guy, Dave something. And he says, over the next 3 years, we're going to talk about uh, the mind body connection. We're going to talk about obstacles to cure. We're going to talk about vaccine injury. And I literally raised my hand and I'm like, what are you talking about? Vaccines are the greatest invention of mankind. And he sort of smirked and, like rolled his eyes and,
Uh-huh.
and said, well, that's one perspective. And we're going to learn another. And I rolled my eyes and was just like, oh my gosh, what a nut job.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
this is how I was in utter disbelief. I had no clue. After the class, I went out and there was a bookstore laid out and he was like, here, read this book. And I read a book called Vaccines, Are They Really Safe and Effective by Neil Z. Miller. It's this little book. In the back of it, there are 960 odd footnotes documenting learning disabilities, seizures, um, neurodevelopmental problems, rheumatoid arthritis, and other autoimmune conditions, all sorts of things, and even death. And I was just like, wait a second. I think because of the fact that I had had a front row seat to see how the sausage was made
You mean with the pharmaceutical
with the
CEO?
pharmaceutical
Yes.
CEO and
Uh-huh.
management team, that I was sort of like, okay, like a light switched on, but still I was like,
Right.
I didn't want to believe. And I took the book in hand to the next weekend of the college. And
Mhm.
I went into the president of the college and I said, or the director, whatever she was, I think she's the president. And I was like, Anne, how can this be true? If this is true, it means they're knowingly injuring and, you know,
Hurting their
well,
clients,
actually,
their customers.
unaliving some of their
Yeah.
customers. A
Yes.
lot of them, our most innocent and vulnerable, our babies and our
Yes.
children. And
Let me just jump go ahead, finish your thought.
she just shrugged her shoulders and sort of said, money, power. And I was just like, I mean, I cried, Joni, for days. I couldn't believe it. But I think it was because it resonated on something in me because I had seen this other thing. And so
Right.
this was a massive awakening for me that really set me on a path. And in that moment, I felt called, literally called by God to make the movie, the Greater Good, the
Mhm.
award-winning documentary I made on vaccines.
And I wanna talk a little bit more about that too, but I just wanna just make a comment for people who, like we were at that time, not even just real believers in vaccines, but it never, like, occurred to me, um, to question it at all, or to even think of it as a normal drug that would have any side effects. Like, it wasn't even on my radar. And so when you talk about this book and the footnotes and the vaccine injuries, and catastrophes that sometimes happen, um, I think it's worth noting that it's not somebody's speculation that these data points arise. Sometimes they come right out of the clinical trials of of these products, and those data points are not publicized and they're not suppressed. And most people don't think to try to find that data before they take it because they just trust their doctor. I just want to put that on the radar for people who would say, well, that might be just somebody's opinion that this happened. All this data exists often in clinical trial settings.
Those 9 the reason, so I read the book and then I was just like, "How can this be true?" And I went
Mhm.
and looked in the back, and there were, like I said, over 960 endnotes, I think,
Mhm.
officially, because
Mhm.
they were at the back of the book. And the point is that these were from the mainstream medical literature and mainstream newspapers and publications. This is just not shared with the public. And what
Mhm.
many of them were, not all of them, but lots of them, were the actual case reports of physicians who had administered these shots to children and infants and then seen them DIE,
Right.
had seen them regress. They had
Mhm.
seen them develop seizures. They'd seen them
Mhm.
have seizures in their offices.
Mhm.
It was, I mean, literally, the medical literature is replete going out hundreds of years with case reports of these kinds of incidences after shots.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's very, very well documented,
Mhm.
just not discussed in the public. And of course, the corporate media doesn't report it because 70% of their advertising revenues come from the pharmaceutical
Right.
industry. So,
Right.
yeah.
So you discover these things and you're called to make this documentary, The Greater Good. Talk about that film, the making of it. I'll put in the show notes where people can find it, and then what happened as you tried to get it distributed.
Yeah, so that's funny. Just even trying to actually, like, speak about it, I mean, we were utterly smeared by the New York Times. Well,
And
first, so
what year
I've
was
been
this, by the way?
it came out April 2nd of 2011, and when it
Okay.
first came out, it came out to rapturous applause because they didn't realize that it was going to be something that was actually quite subversive. And it was subversive because it wasn't polemical. It was actually extremely fair and balanced.
Mhm.
And we had Dr. Paul Offit, who I think yesterday was kicked off of a vaccine advisory committee
Yes.
at CDC. Very,
And he was an unabashed champion of vaccines without question.
he is the biggest vaccine apologist in the country and has been for 20 plus years.
Yes.
And no one in the media, corporate media, when when they platform him, speak about the fact that he profited to the tune of tens of millions. I think the estimates are 50 or $60 million for developing a rotavirus vaccine while he was sitting on the advisory committee on immunization practices and voting to um, keep to approve rotavirus vaccines.
Right. Which is just one example of the fraught conflict of interest that has been rampant through our public health, administration, but we can touch on
Also,
that after.
I
Oh,
have
go
to say,
ahead.
he also used to occupy. He still, I think, is in this position, but he works at Children's Hospital of
That's
Philadelphia, and
right.
he occupied a chair that was funded by Merck, the same company that bought his rotavirus vaccine for like
Mhm,
$160 million, somewhere in that neighborhood.
mhm.
And I think the chair that Merck funded for him that he sat in was like $1.5 million a year. Like
Wow.
this guy, literally, if you want to see conflicted vaccine apologist, vaccine shill, it should
Mhm.
have a picture, in
Right.
Merriam-Webster's of Paul Offit. This is who the man is. He even tried to give us money when we went to go and film him.
Wait, so let's back up. So you're going to have him in your movie at the time in 2011. How did that happen? And when you say he tried to give you money, tell me more about that.
So basically, we go, we're going to make this movie and we're going to
Mhm,
make it fair and balanced because basically I had felt called. I've got to make a movie and find out for myself if what is in this book is true.
mhm.
And so I just start researching and researching and researching. And I have a young child at this point. My son was born in '02. And I first learned about this issue right before I conceived him, literally
Mhm.
2 or 3 months before I conceived him. And so
In the nick
I
of
just
time, that lucky kid.
and he was very lucky, let me tell you, Joni, very, very lucky. And we thought we were being really reckless. And it was just very risky what we were choosing not to give him any shots and
Right.
not to give him vitamin K. And I mean, I had no ultrasounds. I had no interventions. I wouldn't let them use even like anything on me. They had to use like it's called I think Pinard, where they put like a funnel on your belly to listen to
Uh-huh.
your heartbeat. That's what I made them use because I was not going to subject him to anything. I was 38. He was born just before I turned 39, like 3
Yeah.
months before I turned
Yeah.
39. And I didn't want there to be any issues. And yes, I was, healthy, or fairly healthy, but I was just like not going to do anything. And so when I'm doing all this research and I'm learning more and more and more and more. And then we move home to the States and to where I'm from in Idaho. And within a few weeks of finishing the house that I had bought and we'd remodeled,
Mhm.
moved in and I said to myself, I'm ready to make that movie. And I had just been reading all the literature for
Mhm.
years. I'd read about like the Vioxx scandal and then all these things with Eli Lilly, there were all these documents that were released in a court case, how they literally bestow honoraria awards on physicians
Mhm.
to make them look like they are some, leading physician. But what's really happening is they then are secretly paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars to be spokespeople for them and to hold conference calls with other physicians about how great their drug is. And the other physicians on the call don't know that this person is actually been bestowed this award
Right.
and is receiving like extremely high remuneration
Right.
for conducting these calls, and they would take them to these, junkets in Cancun and stuff where they go and they get their continuing medical education credits, which they're required to do every year.
Sure.
But you know what? Who would fund those and who would actually set the agenda and the curriculum? The
Pharma.
pharmaceutical
Yeah.
industry. It was a cardiovascular thing. It was the pharmaceutical industry and all the cardiovascular drug manufacturers. They're
Right.
the ones who would pay for it and set it. So all this stuff, I'm learning this and I'm
Mhm.
continuing to read about shots. And then two amazing filmmakers come into my life. And I was like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. And
Yeah.
so I spent 10 years researching and making that movie. And
Mhm.
it came out in 2011 on April 2nd at the Dallas International Film Festival. And, we had someone from the Wall Street Journal online reviewed it. I think he was there and he reviewed it
Mhm.
and posted a very, very glowing
Mhm.
review.
Wow.
And the LA Weekly in Los Angeles posted a glowing review. And I think even the LA Times might have said something favorable, something like, can't believe what's being said. And I think it was extremely compelling
Mhm.
because they couldn't dismiss it because we actually made Paul Offits of the world look good. And the way that I was able to do it, Joni, is interesting because, they would never let me in the door now, right? After
Right,
all
and also, I just wanna say that you would never get those reviews now with the same exact balanced film from our mainstream media. Something has very much changed in the media landscape since that time.
well, let me tell you, it came out in April and we got great reviews in September when we went to New York to go. So in order to be considered for an Oscar,
Mhm.
you have to do 2 theatrical releases. So we did
Mhm.
our theatrical release in Los Angeles and we got great reviews. 3 months later, they were ready for us.
Oh,
And we went
because
to New
you
York.
were on their radar.
We went to New York to go and
Yep.
do our theatrical release, and the New York Times took us down. They lied about us. But let me just say, so we make the movie, we get these great reviews. They were clearly not expecting it. And the only way, we interviewed Norman Baylor, who was the head of biologics, vaccines and biologics, CBER at FDA.
Mhm.
We interviewed Stanley Plotkin, who was Offit's mentor at Merck, and he was one of the people that Aaron Siri deposed, which became infamous, where he talks about all of the infants that they harvested cells and organs from in order to grow vaccines in them.
Right.
He was one of the chief principals at the Wistar Institute, and like one of the cell lines from aborted baby is known as WI 38, Wistar 38. It was the 38th baby in like 60 or 70 babies that they harvested in order to get an immortal cell line from.
Oh gosh.
It's unbelievable. So anyway, we interviewed him. We got into CDC. I interviewed Melinda Wharton, Dr. Melinda Wharton, who was the deputy director of CDC at the time.
So you
And
clearly had establishment people in this movie to talk about their knowledge and their, quote, "side of this issue."
yes, and we had Walter Ornstein, who was the former head. He was then at Baylor, I think,
Mhm.
in Atlanta near CDC. And we interviewed him, and he used to be head of immunizations at the CDC, of vaccinations. And he actually told me something interesting. He said, you know, uh, if a vaccine injury happens outside of 48 hours after the shot, most people never connect the two. So
Which
people
is
don't even realize that there are vaccine injuries.
right.
But anyway, let me just say that I fully believe that the only reason, there were two reasons that I was able to make this movie and to get in to see all those people. And that is, the whole film was, divinely inspired. And
Mhm.
secondly, I had Goldman Sachs and the University of Chicago stamped on my forehead, right? I had
Yep,
all the kind of imprimaturs of the establishment. And so
right.
I'm in Children's Hospital with Paul Offit, and he puts his arm around me and he's like, "You're the good guys. You're the good
Wow.
guys." And I literally walked down the hallway. We were preparing a scene in his lab, and I was like, "Paul, we have to tell both sides or no one will take us seriously. We are going to tell both sides of this story, not just yours." I was yelling back at him.
Yeah.
When we were going up in the elevator, I was in one elevator with some of our film crew, and um, my film partner, Kendall Nelson, was in the elevator with Offit.
Mhm.
He's like, "How are you guys funding this?" He's like, "Do you need any money?"
Oh, wow, that's why he offered you money. He wanted to, potentially queer the message.
He wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that it
That
was gonna be, even though we had told him that we were making a film, based on people who dedicated their lives to vaccines, and he interpreted that to be only his
yeah.
side, I guess, and
Well,
so
I think there's some hubris in that whole area, but so you get this film made, then you go to New York and something completely different
oh
happens.
my gosh, so the film review comes out online the night before, and then it comes out in print the next day, and it's just a total smear. It was
Mm.
like someone, maybe Paul Offit wrote it. Somebody from the pharmaceutical industry wrote the review. I can't believe it was a journalist. It
Yeah.
had no, resemblance to the film. We actually opened the film with scenes of children in, braces and iron lungs and, talk about, the horrors of past infectious disease outbreaks
Mhm.
like this, and they are, saying that we are just dismissing everything, which is just
Right.
it was just demonstrably untrue, and then they tried to make it like we complained to them about the review when and we were just asking, who had written it and what it was about, and they changed it. We said, "Look, we actually do show these things. This is just factually incorrect.
Mhm.
This has no bearing on the film." And then, they posted online that basically insinuated that we as filmmakers had complained to make us look like,
Mm.
dissatisfied or disgruntled filmmakers. And then when we queried them and said, that's just totally wrong, they then said, oh, well, we had they said that someone on our team had complained, which was just false. We
Right.
checked with every single person on our extended team, and everyone was like, no, we didn't do it. And then they changed their story and they said that they'd received a phone call from somebody, and we challenged that, and they said, "Well, we received a couple phone calls from readers." And we said, "Well, can we see your telephone logs?"
Yeah.
And then they just ghosted us.
Right. It's always very vague. And also, once you print something in the New York Times, it's a big story. You can issue corrections for the next month and no one's going to read the corrections. So
No, no one.
the damage is done. And I think it illustrates what many people who read the mainstream media or any source of media that who take it all as truth, they don't ever think that maybe they're being lied to or there's an agenda afoot. So it's very illustrative of that.
And the New York Times, up until that point, I had believed that it was legitimately the newspaper of
Sure.
record. I've
Yes.
never I don't read it anymore. I haven't
Yeah.
read it. It like, when people share articles, I'll read it, but I mean, I do not pay for a
Right.
subscription,
Right.
and I treat anything that it publishes as propaganda because
Right.
it is.
Right.
They literally, and I know other people, Dr. Andy Wakefield, a friend of mine, he made the movie Vaxxed. He's the doctor, the MMR doctor
Mhm.
who lost his medical license in Britain and literally lost his country too. The whole story around him is a lie. They
Right.
smeared him, they've smeared so many people. So they are not a credible news outlet at this point in my
Sure.
experience. You could look at it on other things too. Look at Russiagate, look at all of this stuff. I mean, it was just all a lie. They've lied about
It's
so many things.
right. I think it's if you know something about a topic and then you go to your paper of record on it and you read about the topic often you will find that they are not fair brokers of the information. So,
They are not
it's not just the New York Times. It's any media with an agenda,
sure.
whatever their source is. So,
But
so
the New York
this
Times is the king of this and the
yes,
biggest
they
one
are
and
the paper
considered the
of that
news
kind of
record,
record. Yes.
yes, for the nation. So it's, yeah, so, I
Interesting.
mean, this is just quite an experience, and also making this during the time that I'm making this and the years right afterwards, then the states like California start attacking vaccine exemptions.
Okay. All right. So let's talk about that a little bit. So you have
Actually, you know what? We need to
oh,
talk about something else really quick before we go
yes.
there. Because in the film, we unpack every single reason that parents should question their doctors and do more research. Because what most people don't know is that vaccines are not studied against true placebos.
Yes,
They
let's
are
talk
not.
about that.
Okay, let me go into that in a second, but let me just
Mhm.
explain that you can't sue the manufacturer if your child is injured by the vaccine. You can't sue the physician or nurse or practitioner
Mhm.
that administered the shot. There's no discovery or due diligence if you go into court. You have to go to the special vaccine court. The vaccine makers aren't liable at all. You, the research, I don't know if people know this, but the vaccine makers, well, actually the pharmaceutical industry doesn't have to publish all the research they do. They just have to submit the research they publish to FDA. So they don't publish the stuff they don't want published.
Okay, so let me just note that the reason you can't sue these companies or the administrators of the vaccine is because of the 1986 act that was passed by Congress, correct? That
Yes.
the vaccine makers went to the Reagan administration and said, "Hey, these products are inherently unsafe. We're getting sued. We're not going to be able to make them anymore." Basically, as a group,
It
and
wasn't
so
like we're not going to be able
yeah,
to. What happened was they were losing so much money because
right.
in the late '70s and early '80s, so many children were catastrophically injured and killed by, in particular, the DPT shot,
Okay,
which no longer exists. We do not use it in the United States. It's still given in the developing world. This deadly shot that we banned, we now use the DTAP, which is attenuated or weakened pertussis.
hmm,
Okay. But so there were all of these lawsuits, and there were jury awards of $18 million back in the late '70s. That's a lot of money, early '80s, you know? And so they were losing money, and there
right,
were so many cases, and so they went to Congress and said, and they had brainwashed enough people into believing that we'd all be dead without them, even
right,
though the death rate from most of these diseases was nigh on 0 by the time the vaccines were introduced.
right,
Um, they went to Congress and said, "We're not gonna make we can't we won't make them anymore because it's not profitable
right.
if you unless you indemnify us." And so Congress passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, which did a bunch of things. One, it set up a vaccine court.
Mhm.
Two, it set up a 75-cent tax on every single vaccine that is administered in this country. And
So we're paying into that.
that 75 cents
Oh,
goes into a trust fund. The
right,
pharmaceutical industry isn't responsible for it.
right,
We are. You are. So you pay into this trust. And then if your child's injured, you basically sue the federal government.
right.
And they
And
have these special masters that are special kind of a judge that sit and oversee it. And you're against government funded attorneys for a government program that's administering government mandated, in some cases, at least
mhm.
government recommended medical interventions. That's
And
what's
so
happening.
if a vaccine is recommended by the CDC to be on the schedule, it qualifies for this kind of indemnification. And so what most people don't know is when you go to the pediatrician and they say, well, these are the shots on the schedule and your kid gets those shots. And sometimes in certain states, as you were going to talk about, they can't even go to school or daycare and or even request an exemption for those things. There are 4 states in the country, I believe, right now that doesn't allow any kind of
Well, West Virginia, there's
exemptions.
a fight going on there,
Yeah,
but
right.
they're trying to change it, but it's still in that. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, talk about then what you were going to talk about,
Yeah.
California and what was
So this is
happening.
just so basically this is all what's going on is that these shots aren't properly studied. They don't study them in risk in they study them only in healthy children. They don't study the entire vaccine schedule. They study them singly. They're given in amazing combinations. A kid can get
Yeah.
8 to 10 shots at 4 or 6 months of age. I think they
And
get 8
also
at
several in one appointment.
That's what I mean, at 6
Yeah.
months of age in one appointment.
Yeah.
At 2 months, I think they get 6 or 7. At 4 and 6 months, they get 8 or 10
Oh,
doses of yeah. So they may get 1 dose, like, they'll get DTAP at each of those shots. They get it at 2, 4, and 6 months. It's only 1 shot, but it's 3 vaccines in that
mhm,
shot, right?
mhm.
And um so basically, this whole program is set up, and the studies are inappropriate, and the whole system is rigged to protect the pharmaceutical industry that makes these shots, not you and your children. And you're just told that they're good. And the doctors actually did not originally, they were originally could be sued in 1987 in a spending bill. Late at night, they inserted a new bill that exempted the doctors from being sued, doctors and others who administer vaccinations in late 1987.
Which is a moral
Mhm.
hazard because what it does is it takes the responsibility of the doctor, the administrator, to do their own real research as to what the risk benefit of a product is that they're injecting into a child.
Same thing for the vaccine makers. They have zero
Right,
incentive to make a safer product and every incentive to make more products, which is why the vaccine schedule has more than tripled in the last 30 years.
right, right.
That's why. Because they have no liability. So it's like literally a license to print money essentially at this
Mhm.
point. And it's very hard to um, make a vaccine. So they're basically they don't have the fear of patent expiry that you have, or patent expiration. I lived in London for a while. They use expiry, patent expiration that you do on other pharmaceutical products. So they just can mint money for a long
Right.
time, liability free. I mean, what business owner wouldn't like that kind of a setup, right?
No,
So,
it's
so
great
as
for
I
them.
mentioned, they don't use proper placebos in the studies, and this is so important. I'm going to give you an example. So I founded a nonprofit called Health Freedom Defense Fund, and we just posted an article the other day, which and we just posted on it on social media yesterday, and it examines how Menquadfie, which was just approved by FDA, was approved. Okay, this is staggering, but this is illustrative of the entire vaccine industry, the entire vaccine structure. This is how it's built. You get a new vaccine. You don't test it against placebo, like saline, some inert placebo. You test it against some kind of a solution like aluminum hydroxide, which is the adjuvant in a vaccine, which is neurotoxic, immunotoxic, toxic to your mitochondria, all these things. It's toxic to all life forms. Aluminum has no biological use, function, or need in the human body, and it causes cognitive impairment in healthy adults. But we're injecting it into babies on their first day of life. But anyway, they will use a placebo like a solution of aluminum, or get this, Joni, another vaccine. And this literally qualifies for science at the FDA. So Menquadfie was compared to Menveo.
Which is a
What?
previous vaccine for a similar
For
usage.
meningitis, for meningococcal illnesses.
Let me just jump in for a second. And the reason that it's really important that an inert placebo be used, like a saline solution, versus just part of a vaccine, like the adjuvant without the active ingredient, or excuse me, a previous vaccine, is because what that will do is it'll cover up any safety signals that could come out of it. Like if you have an injection with saline, you'll have a low safety signal potentially, and then you inject the actual product you're testing and there will be a big gap there if there's a safety signal to be seen. But if you inject something that has an adjuvant, which is an irritant, which is going to cause a safety signal, you're going to see not a very big difference between the quote placebo and the active vaccine. And that enables the manufacturer to say, hey, look, there's not much of a safety signal here. And that's really the issue with
Exactly.
how this is
That's what I
done.
was
It
going to
covers the
unpack.
safety signal. Yeah, please
That's
go
what I was
ahead.
going to unpack for you with this. So Gardasil, which came out in 2006, Merck manufactures it. They had 6 different, I think, clinical trial locations where they tested the vaccine. Only one of them was an inert placebo. All the others were aluminum hydroxide. But when they published the results, they amalgamated them all.
Mm,
So you couldn't discern the difference. And then there was basically no difference between the quote unquote control group, which was a fake control group because it wasn't administered a true placebo,
right.
and the vaccine group. And in the same way, Menquadfie,
Hmm.
5.3% of recipients had an adverse reaction. Menveo, it was 3.6%. So they were like, it's not statistically significant because the other vaccine is actually reactive too. 5.3 does not seem, it's not statistically significant in comparison to 3.6%, but in comparison to 0, they're both significant and neither should be on the market.
Correct.
So this is how they did this. And then Menveo was compared not to a true placebo, but to another meningitis vaccine called Menactra. And Menactra was compared to Menomune, another meningitis vaccine. And guess what Menomune was compared to? No placebo at all.
So the clinical trial for that was there was no safety comparison.
None.
So all the way down this chain, there is not one vaccine that we can say this is the gold standard of safety here. So it's false all the way down.
Yes, it's
And
all a house of cards. It's just built on smoke and mirrors, essentially. And what's interesting is that uh, I can't remember if it's CDC or FDA, one of those federal agencies even says, this is a quote, because clinical trials are conducted under widely varying conditions, adverse reaction rates observed in clinical trials of a vaccine cannot be directly compared to rates in the clinical trials of another vaccine. But that's what
and
they do. That's what they allow. And they say, and it may not reflect the rates observed in clinical practice. Well, if you look at meningitis vaccines, your child is more likely to suffer a severe injury or death from the shot than from meningitis.
But
itself.
but people don't know that, and I would venture to say probably a lot of pediatricians don't even know that.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yeah.
So this Menquad who names
Yes.
these things, the recent approval that came out under this current administration was an approval of an existing product for now a younger age group, right? So this is now being approved for like newborns basically, right? 6 months to 2 years or something. So our most tiny little humans are being given this product that, nobody can demonstrably say is safe, because of the safety signal being buried. Um, and this is typical of all vaccine trials, as far as I know, right? There isn't a vaccine on the market right now that has a true placebo safety trial with saline, which is
There are none on the current CDC recommended
okay.
schedule that have been properly studied. There were some proper placebo studies back in the or I shouldn't say proper, but there were some placebo studies. They looked at very, very few small populations for a very short period of time, so I wouldn't consider them proper.
Mhm.
Um, and so no vaccine on the current, recommended children's schedule has been studied against a placebo
Okay.
or properly studied. I mean, there are flu vaccines and hepatitis B vaccines that have been studied for 3 days or 4 days.
Right, which means that if a child takes one of those shots during the clinical trials and on day 5 or day 4 has a very bad event, that is not part of the data that's being collected and is not considered a bad event from the injection.
And, I
Am
mean,
I
there was
correct?
a child in Vermont who, if it's already post-licensure, then there unless the family knows that there's a reporting system called the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, they won't even ever report it. There was a child in Vermont, I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, something like that, 10 years ago, that got a flu vaccine and died 7 days later, 7-ish days later, got really sick and died. And, I mean, that most likely never makes it into the system because
Right.
most people until COVID, no one even knew that VAERS existed. Very few
Right.
people did. And there's been federal research that's investigated this that's found that fewer than 1% of all vaccine injuries are ever reported, but 2.6% of vaccines administered result in a serious adverse event.
Which is a really high number considering, and one other point I wanna make before going on to the, Idaho Medical Freedom Act, which I think is very important in this context. These vaccines are not studied also in, um, in a group. Kids now, if they take every vaccine on the schedule, I think it's, what, 72 shots before they're 18, if they take every suggested shot, and no studies have been done comprehensively of the accumulation of each shot. So everything's looked at for a very brief time, solo, without proper placebo studies, which it's a real issue in terms of saying that vaccines are safe and effective, which is always the trope that is repeated and repeated and repeated. So there's a group of people now who are becoming increasingly aware of this, and they'd like to be able to have their children opted out of these things or opted out of medical interventions that are, quote, mandated. Can you talk a little bit more about where those mandates come on a state level and then what called you to write the Idaho Medical Freedom Act, unless there are other
Mhm.
you want to talk about in that context?
Well, I should talk about Health Freedom Defense Fund too, just because it
Yes.
preceded that. But basically, so let me just say that there is a lawsuit now from Stand for Health Freedom and two heroic doctors. Dr. Ken Stoller from California, who lost his medical license for writing vaccine exemptions in California, and Dr. Paul Thomas of Oregon, another hero who lost his medical license for committing the heinous crime of publishing research on his own pediatric patients, which was just an analysis of every single child in his practice, looking at the health outcomes of those children who some of whom were never vaccinated, some who were partially vaccinated, and some who were fully vaccinated, which exposed the lie that
Mhm.
vaccines actually promote health. They actually erode health. And he lost his license right away for actually publishing that study. They just pulled it. Like, horrible. So anyway, what really, I mean, I got into this a long time ago because during the making of the greater good, I started to see all of this pressure on institutions that they were trying to take away our rights. And I just thought, listen, if we don't have the right to choose what we put into our own bodies and how we handle our own medical treatment and our own health, then we don't live in a free, fair, or just society. I mean, we are nothing but chattel, right? I mean, we're
Mhm.
just livestock. And in early 2020, literally in the first days of January, when we were starting to hear all the media reports about, this dangerous thing in China, I knew right away what was going on because they had put in place all of this legislation for the last 20 years in order to facilitate a really draconian response to a so-called public health crisis. And so, I mean, my radar was just up. I was telling my husband and my son, "Oh my gosh, they're finally going to force people to get vaccines. They're going to." I envisioned travel restrictions and
Mhm.
contact tracing and forced vaccinations
And there it was.
under the guise of public health. And
Sure.
so I just knew it was coming. And so
Mhm.
that's what actually was the impetus behind me founding Health Freedom Defense Fund. And Health Freedom Defense Fund is the organization that stopped the federal travel mask mandate
Mhm.
in 2022. And we just stopped the federal government from um, requiring that green card applicants get the COVID shot. We've sued the federal government 4 times, and 2 of the cases were dismissed after they rescinded the emergency, but we haven't lost yet. So that's a great track record. And
Mhm.
we have a huge case against the Los Angeles Unified School District. We just lost the last round, but it's not
Yeah.
over yet. And it was the first case that's ever put a dent in Jacobson, the lawsuit from 1905 that's used to justify vaccine mandates. So basically, I had been doing 20 years of research and I thought I've got to do something. I know what's
Mhm.
going on. And I'd met I think just by grace, the grace of God, I'd met some fantastically accomplished commercial litigators, like really experienced trial lawyers, trial attorneys. And I started educating them and telling them about the vaccine court and all of these, idiosyncrasies, it's really unethical and immoral to have this kind of a system. And they were aghast. They couldn't believe it. I mean, they were offended because they're attorneys and they thought the courts were there to do the right thing and to
Right.
serve people, not to protect the government and this program and the pharmaceutical industry.
Right.
And so we were ready to run and we filed one of the first lawsuits challenging mandates of the shots when they were emergency use authorized.
The
But just
COVID shots.
the COVID shots, it
Mhm.
was challenging the Los Angeles Unified School District. We've sued them twice, and we've
Mhm.
twice forced them to rescind their vaccine mandates. But basically, that's what Health Freedom Defense Fund has done, and we have a case that's coming against Santa Clara right now, which was the epicenter, literally the belly of the beast. We've sued
Santa
Disney,
Clara University.
the city county.
Oh, okay. Because the university was very bad with COVID
Yes, well,
mandates.
they were in Santa Clara, so
Yeah,
yeah, they
yeah.
were terrible. But we forced Disney to settle. They were abusing their employees essentially and just being horrible. And we forced them to settle. They never settle. That was fantastic. And
Mhm.
then we're suing Nike, and we've got some other stuff in the works as well. So we educate, we help people to advocate, and then we litigate when it's necessary.
Mhm.
But this whole process, my life kind of work now since I've left um, the corporate world and committed my life to trying to play on the right team, to do good, um, has led me to a point where I really appreciate that the fundamental problem here is the negation, literally the utter denial of the most basic and fundamental of human rights, and that is the right to medical and health autonomy. And so as I watched what happened in 2020 and 2021 and 2022 and on, I just thought, oh my gosh, we've got to do something about this. Well, in 2023, the Idaho legislature passed a law called the Coronavirus Stop Act, which prohibited anyone in the state of Idaho from mandating the COVID shot for any purpose. I didn't know about it. I didn't know that the shot existed or that this
Mm.
legislation existed. But what happened was in the summer of 2024, I had just been really thinking about it and mulling what I thought was the most important thing for me to do at this point, and it was to try and um, basically complete my mission. When I started Health Freedom Defense Fund, my objective was to establish a societal norm. Sorry, to establish a societal norm
Mhm.
that each and every one of us has this basic human right to medical and health autonomy. That no one else has to live with our choices, and no one else has the moral authority to tell us what to do with our bodies, to keep ourselves well or to treat ourselves when we're ill. And so I just thought, I've got to do something. And I thought, if there's a place that we can do it, I'm hoping it's Idaho.
Mhm.
Well, one of my colleagues is a woman named Misty Carlfeld. I have to take a sip. My mouth's
Oh,
getting
sure. And Misty is, she runs Health Freedom Idaho. She's the executive director of Health Freedom Idaho.
co-executive director with
Oh,
Sarah
okay.
Clendenin. But I spoke with Misty, and she connected me with an Idaho state senator. We had a phone call for about 90 minutes, the three of us. And I told him what my idea was, and he said, I love it. And he said, write the bill, and I will, if I like it, I'll sponsor it for you. This is July of 2024.
Mhm.
And so I literally hung up the phone and started doing research, and I found the Stop Coronavirus Act. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. I went and looked for all these other things, and I just thought, well, they've already passed this. What if
Mhm.
I take this and adapt it to my needs? What if I expand it to anything and everything? And so I rewrote the bill for um, every medical intervention that anyone could ever think of.
And so
Devices.
you're writing this bill so that people can choose to opt out and that
No, no, no.
no entity
To opt
can
out,
mandate or no entity, excuse me,
to
no entity can
prohibit
mandate.
the government, no state actor, no employer,
Okay.
no school, no business may require a medical intervention in order to be employed, access services, enter the business, participate in any way, shape, or form in society on a normal basis. And no one can actually be excluded, even if they're unvaccinated and healthy, even in the event of a disease outbreak. But that was just like a kicker at the end. But basically, so I wrote this super broad definition um, of medical intervention,
Mhm.
and we broadened the application as well, so that um, it includes everybody but hospitals and medical practices that take CMS funds, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. And that was a strategic decision that I would like to change and fix, but we had to do it
Mhm.
because St. Luke's is the largest employer in the state of Idaho. And they were going to come down so hard in opposition. And I just wanted to get it on the books as close to perfect as we can. And I think we will work towards that now going forward. But right now, so I basically took the bill and reworked it to serve my purposes, which was to outlaw medical mandates for almost everyone in the state of Idaho. And after several months of drama and literally 2 weeks of utter intrigue, the governor signed it. He actually vetoed the bill the first time,
Right.
and both the Senate and the House brought it back. But the senator who was my original sponsor completely betrayed me.
In what way?
He brought the bill back, but when he brought it back, there was a carve out of all children in daycare.
Oh, that is clever.
No, that's evil.
Right, but it because it gets them before they even.
The vast
Yeah,
majority of
that's
shots are
terrible.
to those under 3, and if a child is in daycare in Idaho, they're in a private daycare, and the reason that they did this was because there was a case in front of the Idaho Supreme Court, which was going to be heard on May 5th, and it was between a family, a mother who had claimed a religious exemption for her child or a philosophical exemption for her
Mhm.
child, and the daycare, New Horizons Daycare, said, "We don't have to honor it. We're a private
Ah,
sector. We don't have to honor it because that's a state law, and yes, but it only applies to state entities,
I see.
so public schools." And if the legislature, if Senator Dan Foreman, who did this, had succeeded in colluding with the governor's staff, because it was the governor's office, he met with the governor's office after promising me he would not go forward without my agreement. He would not change any language without my agreement. He did it anyway. He changed the language in cahoots with the governor's office. He then went and presented it after I told him not to. He presented it in committee, and they basically had defined daycare in 6 different ways,
Mm.
5 or 6 different ways. I think it was 6. And it basically said that, daycares were exempt from this new statute. But then the Idaho House came to the rescue, and they brought a bill that was exactly my original bill and addressed the governor's fake, uh, concern about the bill. When he vetoed the bill the first time a week before, he said the reason that he was vetoing the bill was because sick children couldn't be sent home from school. He was worried that the bill precluded schools from sending sick children home. That was just a lie. There was existing code already on the books in Idaho that said exactly what schools could do when an individual is sick, and is to send them home. And we didn't touch that. They just made it up. But you know what? They really shot themselves in the foot with that one, because we could then go back to them and said, okay, we addressed your concern,
Right.
governor.
So
And
it's
so the House brought my exact bill with the reassurance that this did not affect that one section of code about sending sick children home, that it did not contradict that. And then there was basically these two competing bills all week long. And ultimately, at the 11th hour on Friday morning, we were able to change the Senate bill. We'd already forced the exclusion for the daycares out of
Mhm.
it. We
Mhm.
then added that no healthy, unvaccinated individual can be excluded in the
Mhm.
event of any disease outbreak. And we also added that this bill can never be contradicted, and that the governor, the legislature, the health department, no one can issue any um, rules, regulations, or statute that contradicts it. So, I mean, this is literally landmark, I mean, truly
Sure.
landmark legislation globally, because there is nowhere in the world, I believe, where your rights are literally protected by law, which, they should be. But
Yeah, it shouldn't in what you've done in like, it's a masterstroke because when I said, about opting out, it was so wrong because what you've done is created a landscape that should exist everywhere where you don't even have to opt out because nobody can force you to do something against your will. And
it's the
this
way, Joni, it's the way it should be. You opt
yes,
in to the medical interventions that you choose, which
right.
is the way it should be in a free and fair society.
But we don't have that in other states. Like Idaho is now, it has a completely different template. And so there are two things I want to ask. Let me just take the devil's advocate. Well, geez, doesn't this make the whole population unsafe now? Right? I mean, that's the argument people will say, like, I'm going to be unsafe if you don't get some medical intervention.
Mhm.
Where would you point people for that argument that that's just not, that's a false argument?
Well, let's just look. People say, well, everybody's going to get the measles. Well, 6 or 7% of all recipients of the measles vaccine will never, ever mount an immune response. It's called primary vaccine failure. And then another percentage there's secondary failure where it just doesn't sustain any kind of immune response. And so if you look at the last 20 years, not just in measles, but mumps and whooping cough, there have
Mhm.
been in those two in particular, there have been thousands, in fact, I believe tens of thousands of cases in fully vaccinated populations. These shots do not confer lifelong immunity. And
Mhm.
that that hen is finally coming home to roost. We finally know that that's true, that these shots do not stop disease outbreaks. The reason that we give 2 doses of MMR is because there were huge outbreaks after they
Mhm.
were only giving 1 dose. And there are outbreaks in fully vaccinated populations all the time. You just never hear about it
Right, because
because they don't want you to know that. And
right.
so that's one thing that's important. The other thing is that we're told that if you have antibodies to something that you will be protected. That's just not true. You can have sky high levels of antibodies to tetanus and have no immunity, and you can have no antibodies and be immune. We know this. It's so much more complex. Our immune systems are so
Mhm.
much more complex. There was a point in time when we used to believe that antibodies were um, um, indicator of having overcome something, that you had already been
Mhm.
exposed and overcome it. And so it was like you're healed. And now we view it as this marker. It's just wrong. And
Mhm.
so that's another issue. And then if you look at this, I mean, let me just ask you, Joni, how many of your adult family members and friends are fully vaccinated with the CDC's schedule?
Oh, nobody, because we didn't grow up that way. And
Exactly.
our
Nobody.
nobody. And no, I don't take that position that everyone needs all the shots to protect everyone
No,
else.
but my point is, let me just finish the
And our
thought.
parents too.
It'll really help to illustrate this.
Yes.
We know that vaccine-induced immunity is temporary. It wanes very rapidly over time. In the case of pertussis, it's almost all gone within 4
Mhm.
years. In 4 years. So how many of us have had that shot? in the last 4 years.
I
Do
don't
we all
even know
have
if I've
whooping
ever.
cough? No.
Yeah. Right.
Exactly, and so my point is the vast majority of adults alive have no vaccine-induced immunity to anything,
Right.
and we don't have tons and tons of disease outbreaks and deaths and morbidity from illnesses. Here's the other thing that's so important to understand. The federal data dating back to the Civil War itself, that data itself shows that 90%, nearly 90%, I think it's 89% exactly, but nearly 90% of the decline in infectious disease mortality that occurred during the 20th century
Mhm.
occurred before the widespread use of either antibiotics or vaccines. It's not the vaccines that stopped all
Right.
of this stuff. It's just improved public health, sanitation, getting
Mhm.
the we used to live in sewage, like there was sewage and
Thrown
manure
out of windows.
out of windows and in the streets, like you had to wear boots in New York City because it
Yes.
was just like a freaking cesspool.
Yeah.
And there was open sewage everywhere. There
Mhm.
was fetid drinking water. There was no refrigerated food. There was, they had to bring food in. It wasn't refrigerated. It wasn't fresh. People were poor. You didn't have, infrastructure. And so there was no clean drinking water. That's the key ingredient. If you look at the number one killer for decades in the world, it was waterborne disease. You build wells for people and you see disease plummet. You give them good nutrition and you see that not only
Right.
does disease plummet, but any kind of morbidity or like complication from a disease plummets as well. So a perfect example is measles. In the first 10 to 20 years of the 20th century, there were between I think it was 5 at the lowest and 20,000 deaths at the highest per year. But let's just say on average, there were 10 to 20,000 deaths in our population of 150 million, call it back
Mhm.
then. Okay. In 1960, from 1958 to 1962, in the 5 years before they introduced the measles vaccine in the United States, guess how many deaths there were on average in the United States?
Far fewer than 20,000
430.
out of the entire population. And that was before the advent of widespread vaccination for
The
measles.
vaccine was introduced in
After
1963.
wow, okay.
Yeah. So my point is this idea, were there still cases? Absolutely. But, listen, the Brady Bunch, a
Mm.
very popular show when we were kids,
Yes.
they joked about it. It was like they did a whole show on how, oh, we've got the measles and how great it was because they didn't have to go to school. I
But
mean,
it's worth noting that that show has been pulled from most platforms now, I believe, that you
yes.
can't even see it because it sends the message of how things used to be. I mean, I had measles, I had chickenpox, I had mumps, and I'm probably healthier for it.
Not probably. We
Yes.
know for a fact that these childhood illnesses actually reduce the incidence of autoimmune disease, inflammatory conditions, and even cancer.
Yeah. Well, and look what we're doing. We're robbing entire generations of having normal childhood diseases by giving them these shots and curing. I mean, it's so complicated and so
Yeah.
dark, really. But we're starting to get up a little bit close to the time that we said we would come to because you are just a font of knowledge, Leslie.
Joni,
Um,
I just have to say, my
mm,
brother and I and my sister had chickenpox and flew on an airplane when we were children. I was probably my brother grew up he woke up with chickenpox, and we were set to fly back east from California to family members for the holidays, and we just got on the airplane totally normally. My brother had it when we got on. I started to break out on the plane, and my sister afterwards. No one cared. Now
yeah.
you're quarantined.
Oh, yeah. Or you'd be arrested somehow
You
for
you're you would
endangering
be
the
qua
public
when
health.
children get it, they are not allowed to see anybody.
Yeah,
Literally.
it's we have this upside down world. So now in Idaho has what should be everywhere.
Yes.
Can you just briefly tick through their how that's going to be exported to other states?
Yes,
What
and let me just
any
say
suggestions on that?
yeah, and let me just say why it's so incredibly important, because if you look at what's happened in the last 10 years, there has been a literal war, and I'm not exaggerating,
Mhm.
against parents who want to opt their children out of vaccines for religious or other reasons. And what as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people don't know this, but a lot of vaccines are grown in aborted cells from aborted babies.
Right.
So they have a religious objection to them. But other people have a religious exemption because you are defiling the body with all sorts of toxins, aluminum and polysorbate 80 and polyethylene glycol. And
Mhm.
I mean, so many things. not even to mention the antigen that's in there, right?
Mhm, mhm.
The killed, genetics, of this whatever it is, and, so what's happened is California has really led the way. They used to have a religious exemption and a medical exemption, and they removed that, with a bill called SB 277, but they had been eroding vaccine exemptions for years before they did this, and what's happened is now there's literally only medical exemptions, but in order for a doctor to write it, a doctor can write one, but it has to be approved by, like, a state health czar,
Yeah,
and if a doctor writes more than 5 in a year, then they get brought in front of the state government and
yeah, and so a
medical
lot of them
licensing
won't
board.
they won't even entertain writing one, and
Mm.
that became very clear in the COVID the mandate era is that people who really needed medical exemptions from there could not get them.
That's why we're suing
Doctors
Santa
would not write them.
and that's why we're suing Santa Clara.
Yeah.
Exactly, Joni, because they denied an employee a medical exemption who really had an issue. It's
Yeah.
unbelievable.
But
So,
even just
anyway,
leaving aside, like, the religious aspect, it shouldn't even have to be a religion, you should be able to just have, "Look, I don't want this.
yeah,
I
exactly.
don't want this." But anyway, so, many states, California led the way. You're talking about eroding medical exemptions, basically making them not easily obtainable even if you need one, and they've eliminated religious exemptions.
And then that spread across the country to New York, Connecticut, Maine, and West Virginia is in the same boat, although there's a fight going on, they're trying to
Right.
restore them. But basically, those 4 states, which is a good chunk, I think it's 20% of all children in America are in
Mhm.
those states. You can only get a medical exemption for your child, but you actually can't get a medical exemption because it's only theoretical because no one will write them for the most part.
Right.
There was just a court case in New York that came out 10 days ago, maybe,
Mhm.
2 weeks ago, where a court ruled that a girl who had had a severe reaction to vaccines and had 6 or 7 experts say you should never get another vaccine.
Mhm.
I think it was hepatitis B. Um, she was being the school was forced to take her back to school,
And
allow her back in school.
she's like a high school student.
Yeah, she's 16 years old,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway,
And and also these exemptions, I mean, it's not
mm,
like they're not just for public schools, they're for daycares, private schools, college, and, maybe not colleges, although I think that's spreading to colleges,
very
in
much
some
so.
states. So,
The
you
only
can't.
exclusion for that in
Yeah.
California is homeschooling, but they're gonna
Okay.
go after that. And they're gonna try I don't know if homeschool is excluded in New York and Connecticut and Maine, but basically, the whole point is that, because I do need to wrap up, the whole point is
Sure.
this is an inversion of the way the situation should be. Every single state should have a Medical Freedom Act codifying
Mhm.
the absolute and fundamental right to medical and health autonomy for every adult and for the parents over their children,
Right. Um,
unless they have literally proven to be neglecting their children, okay? Um, and this is why I'm working with Stand for Health Freedom and other groups to try and roll the Medical Freedom Act out across the nation. We
state
have
by state.
yeah, state by state.
Mhm.
And so we've created a model bill, which is already in the works to be introduced into other states. And we've created some legislative packs. We have got to get them up on our website. We haven't done that yet to help people.
Mhm.
And we're basically kind of creating this how to do it in your state, how to engage with your legislators. And then we've got a packet of information explaining the bill to the legislators themselves as well. So you can give that to them.
Okay.
So we've really tried to create this turnkey,
Mhm.
um, kit,
Mhm.
to help people to do this in their state, to right this ugly wrong because, I don't wanna live in a world where it's acceptable for someone to chip me because they deem that that's what's
Right.
appropriate, and that's where it's headed, Joni,
Right.
and that's why our bill excludes devices
Oh,
or
very good.
anything that could monitor us. So any device, pill, medication, injection,
Any
mask,
intervention.
any intervention at all
Yeah.
that could affect your biology.
Well, I think it's really important given especially what's happened to us over the last 5 years, which woke a lot of people up. I will put in the show notes any links, that I get from you for the, turnkey toolkit, information, also a link to Stand for Health Freedom, which is a great, on the ground in every state organization.
Yeah.
Um, I know you have to wrap up. I think even if we don't talk about the other issues I was hoping to get to, just to know about the Idaho situation as a template for something else and to get people to ask questions on why do we have to take or why are we forced to take these medical interventions and maybe like we don't need to be and what can we do about it
Yeah.
and then just to wrap up, we have a whole new group of people inside the administration now who are aligned with medical choice, with health freedom, with making America healthier. Can you just give me a couple of brief comments on what you think about the current situation on the ground, what we have to be optimistic about, and how maybe we need to navigate that fine line between cheering on successes and still demanding accountability in
Yeah.
terms medical intervention and also surveillance type of things that you were talking about, chipping, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So,
Some last
um,
thoughts.
I think it's really depressing to see how hard it is for Secretary Kennedy to get to the bottom of what's really going on, and I think we have to understand that um, those of us who have been in the health freedom and medical freedom arena for a long time, we want everything to change right now. We want,
Sure.
we want clean food and we want safe medications that are voluntary. We want no shots if they're not proven safe and they're not proven safe
Hmm.
or effective. We want
All
everything
the
changed.
things. Yeah.
We want fluoride gone. We want all of these things, and unfortunately, I think that there are quid pro quos. I think that there is, horse trading that's happening and that Secretary Kennedy is being given, a free rein to do some things, but not all
Hmm.
things.
Sure.
And whether this is right or not, it seems like they're going to be able to expose a lot about the vaccine paradigm, the misconceptions about the vaccine paradigm, the lack of science, the lack of rigor, and the dangers. I think they're going to be able to expose more of that, and that
It
seems to
does
be
seem
coming.
like
And I think that is what has precipitated, to some extent, this massive um, circus in opposition. So last week you had Susan uh, Monarez. I don't know
Monarez.
if it's Monarez. Is it Monarez
Mon- it's
or
either
Monarez?
that or Monarez.
Yes, one of the two.
Same.
So she was the CDC head, and she'd only been in position for less than
A
a month.
month. Yeah.
And and she was fired by the president for essentially leaking and um, disobeying instructions from Secretary Kennedy. And then uh, three people resigned in protest. Three
Hmm.
senior officials resigned in protest. But these are all people who know that heads are going to roll. And they're going to roll because the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has created this working group to analyze the COVID shots, which is going to expose all the lies that have been told about the COVID shots and all the data that's been withheld. So people know the real truth about them. So this is like very frightening. And I haven't actually read it, but my husband told me this morning that 1,000 employees at CDC have signed a letter or something and called for Bobby's resignation today. I haven't seen it yet, but that's what I heard. And so this is all over the news. My point is the vaccine industry is in disarray and
Hmm.
panic because the truth is going to come out.
Hmm.
And there are polls showing that 60% of parents want the shots to be studied properly, that they are worried and they don't think they have been. This is not like, fringe people who are calling.
Right.
This is 60% now of the parents.
And
People
that's
are
a
not
huge change from just 6, 7 years ago. It just most people never thought about it.
100%. And
Yeah.
so I think that we have great momentum. I haven't seen what Bobby said in front of Congress yesterday. I don't know. I would like to see it. I think that, he's doing everything he can, but it is just vicious. It's a blood sport. I've heard from people who are on the inside there that every day they're just trying to thread the needle. And that
Yeah.
means working with the other agencies. It's not, he doesn't control USDA. He doesn't control EPA. He's not in charge of everything. He can't fix everything that we want him to fix overnight, but I think that he's doing huge things. And we have the autism report coming out in a few weeks.
Hmm.
That's going to be huge. There was a cabinet meeting where he and Trump had a back and forth that went for about 12 minutes. And in that, Secretary Kennedy announced that 1 in 12 and a half boys in California have autism. California has the best surveillance system in the nation. So that is staggering.
It's
And it's 1 in 19 or 20
devastating.
kids. Yeah, it used to be the best study, the biggest study ever done was in Wisconsin in 1970, 900,000 kids. It was zero point 0.7 in 10,000 in 1970. And then President Trump said, something's happening. I don't know if it's a drug or what. He knows what it is.
Yeah,
He would
yeah,
not have posted that tweet that he posted the other day
right.
if he didn't know. And so my point is that I think that the other side is desperate and they're doing
Mhm.
everything they can to throw everything they can at him in order to derail this effort,
Sure.
but it's not going to work. And then here's the problem. It seems that Secretary Kennedy has been given some leeway to do stuff on vaccinations.
Mhm.
But there's this other problem, which is, um, that this administration seems to be ushering in a digital control grid.
Yes.
And I've written many articles on this. I've given presentations on this that you can see on our website at healthfreedomdefense.org. If you click on learn and then go down to presentations, you can see speeches and presentations I've given on it, and you can just search about articles I've written on it. But basically, we are entering the age of AI, and there is an AI arms race happening. And the reason that we have 5G everywhere is not for rapid download, so that they
For
can
our
actually
convenience.
it's to monitor us so they can do facial recognition of us everywhere we go. And so they can monitor all of our biometrics and they want to install. I mean, you've seen Albert Bourla from the CEO of Pfizer talk about how they'll be able to ensure compliance
Mhm.
with medications that are chipped.
Right. And they can tell if you're taking it, how much you have in your system. I mean, this technology is not so far-fetched at all.
No,
And it's not for us. It's not for us. It's
Yes,
not for
and
our
think about
benefit.
there's a cap. I was on an interview yesterday and she was telling me about there's some cap where they can actually read your mind and what you're
Oh
imaging and
god.
all
Oh
sorts of things like
no.
this. But I also know that there's the technology that actually they can change your memories, insert memories and wipe memories. They've done this. And so my point is, well, are we just all going to be zombies? I mean, are we going to be cyborgs? Is that what Terminator was all about?
Yeah.
This is where it's headed. Is it? And so I think there's the Trump administration signaled that with putting JD Vance as
Mhm.
VP. Okay. He is it's an not a secret at all. It's open that Peter Thiel,
Mhm.
um, who is one of the PayPal mafia guys, right?
Mhm.
He's like big tech guy,
Mhm.
very, very wealthy. He funded JD Vance's Senate run to the tune of something like $15 million.
Right.
And now JD Vance is vice president. And all these things have been written about him and published about him. He wrote a book called Hillbilly Elegy. They made it
Right.
into a movie. I mean, maybe that's just all organic and spontaneous, but the skeptic in me doubts that.
Right.
And then they have all of these close ties. Think about what happened the first day, Trump's first full day in office. What was the thing called where he had Sam Altman and Larry Ellison of Oracle, and I forget who the third guy was, but it was
Yeah.
all about investing $500 billion in
Da-
data centers,
Data
right?
centers and
And AI.
yeah.
And it's called Stargate, maybe?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is where it's headed, everyone. And so if we want to stop this, it's not going to come from the administration. It's not going to come from Secretary Kennedy. It's going to come from the people. Every time you go to the airport, you have to opt out. I mean, it's imperative that we do not comply. We did not get out of COVID by COVID was extended by our compliance, our complicity.
Absolutely, and the population taught them what we would do. I mean, that's
Exactly.
basically it was a big aside from many other things, it was a data collection enterprise. They now
100%.
know how much compliance there will be, although I think that many people woke up, and so the number of non-compliant people is growing, which is great. But so what you're saying is there's a tension between the possibly the best situation in HHS we're ever gonna get, right? The most health friendly, freedom friendly, gold science standard friendly administration or leadership we're ever going to get, coupled with another agenda that's happening in the same administration. So, it's a fine line to walk to support all the good that's happening, but to stand up against a greater tyranny, which is basically the removal of our free will and any agency we might have in all aspects of our life when it is all complete if they succeed in it.
Yeah, and even in HHS, it's still a fight. It's not like
Oh,
Secretary Kennedy
sure.
just has free reign. He's the reason that Susan Menarez had to be fired was because she was fighting him.
Yeah.
She wouldn't it's because the deep state, there's two versions of the term deep
Hmm.
state. One is that it's the kind of global government that controls the world. But there's another more kind of colloquial version of it, and that's just the permanent bureaucratic
Right.
class in the
Yeah.
administrative state that controls things, and he's fighting them.
Sure.
He has, from what I've heard, something like 500 people loyal to him and then tens of thousands who are fighting him.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
that's a problem,
imagine getting up every day
and
and
going into
dealing
that.
with that, and
Yeah.
then having people who were in your movement shout you down because you didn't get in there and wave a magic wand and make everything exactly how, they would have you make it. So it's tricky.
It is
Um,
tricky. So, I mean, my
yeah.
point is, I think that what we do is we criticize the heck out of the administration for all the bad and all the things that we fear, at the
Mhm.
same time as we applaud them for all the good stuff.
Mhm.
But by criticizing them and we are holding their feet to the fire. And by holding their feet to the fire and calling them out on everything, we are doing two things. One, we are actually giving them cover to do what's good and what's right. And we are
Yes.
also making them know that we are not going away and that we do care and we are not going to allow this to happen. And I think that's imperative and
Mhm.
incumbent upon each of us to do. So it's so many people have kind of disengaged, I think, because they think, oh, we can rest assured that all the things are handled. We've got a new administration. It's all different, blah, blah, blah. No,
It's
you
not
have
different.
got to be on this because this train has already left the station and it's going to be hard to stop it, but we can.
Yes. Well, that's really great. It's a great take. And on that note, I think we can wrap up. I'm going to put all of the things you mentioned in the show notes, and I'll be in touch to make sure I get all that right. Do you want to leave us with where we can find you and any last thoughts?
Sure. I hope you really, as a last thought, digest. Actually, let me tell you where to find us first. Healthfreedomdefense.org. You can sign up for our newsletter, which we send out every 2 weeks or so. You can become a member for $10, and that's a one-time fee. We're actually going to be expanding our membership tiers so that there are all different levels of it, so that you can support us on an ongoing basis, and you can just donate there too if you want. Um, and then my final message, Joni, is that we did not get into this mess that we're in as a society and a nation by being engaged. We got into it because we've taken, as Americans, our eyes off the ball. We are not paying attention. We are too busy in our lives, and we are not holding our school boards and our city councils and our mayors and our state legislatures and our governors to account. And we have to do that, and our federals as well. We have to do that. We actually have to, because that's the only way our system works, is if we show up and we
Mhm.
let them know that we will not tolerate them to serve their corporate interests, their vested interests, that they are there to serve the people. That's it. And so my mission is to establish medical autonomy, health autonomy as a societal norm and to codify that in law. We are only going to do that if you show up, if you engage. And what we were able to do in Idaho shows that it can be done. And you know how this works, right? Like the
Mhm.
100th monkey syndrome and things like this. Once somebody does it, like, do you know who Shaun White is, the flying tomato? He's that like amazing snowboarder who went and did all these things in the Olympics.
No.
He- No one had ever done double and triple flips on a snowboard before him. He ended up doing 4. He completely shattered. It's like Roger Bannister and the 4-minute mile.
Yeah.
No one thought it could be done until Roger Bannister trained and trained and trained and did it. And then once he broke through, everybody did it. Everybody who could. I couldn't do it. And in
Yeah,
the
but you
same way, the Medical Freedom Act, the Idaho Medical
Yep.
Freedom Act, I think has broken that barrier.
Mhm.
It can be done, folks. There are so many legislators who are on our side. You will not believe it. And this was something that I learned in getting that bill through, is that they were arguing on my behalf. They were calling out those who challenged them and saying, the government lied to us. The legislators were saying this stuff.
Terrific.
You have allies, you just don't realize it.
Right.
Meet with them in the off season, do your work, access our legislative pack. I will try and get it on the website this week.
Terrific. Well, wonderful. Thank you for that inspiration, Leslie. And it was just great to spend this time with you. And I hope you'll come back again.
I will, Joni. Thank you so
All
much for
right.
having me. I really
Okay.
appreciate it.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye-bye.